why don't you pick up that thread?
Okay, I'll pick up from there. Am I speaking into the microphone well enough?
Yes.
Hearing me? Okay. I'd like to thank Assembly members Simon and Mosley for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to talk about my research. I'm not here to advocate for or against a specific proposal. My research does not point to a unique policy, but I do hope that the evidence will inform any decisions by policy members. I also hope to cool down some of the heat that Greg was talked about and provide a little bit of light for you to understand this. And I'm going to try to be brief and as non-technical as possible. And I'd like to start with having each of you imagine that you are the director of admissions for specialized high schools. And you're all now directors of admission for the specialized high school, and it is your task to try and predict which students will do well in the high schools. And this gets at the concept of validity and a statistical concept called variance, but I'm not going to delve into those that way. You know nothing about the student. How are you going to predict how he or she will do in the high schools? If you had to guess, your best guess would be that the freshman grade point average will be what the average is for the class, which is about 85 in the specialized high schools. So if you make that guess for everyone, you're going to have a lot of errors. You're going to guess wrong. Some of the guesses will be close. Many of them will be far off. So you want to do something to reduce the amount of errors you make. So they come to you with a specialized high school admissions test. So what's that going to do for you? It will help, it will eliminate, it will reduce the errors. In fact, it will reduce the errors in my study. It showed it would be about 20%. In the METIS study that the city commissioned a few years ago was about 21 or 22%. That means it's measuring something relevant to success in the high school. However, it's still missing about 80%. So you want to do a little better than that. The state achievement tests are a little better than that. They will reduce the error by about 28%. That's a significant improvement, but still you're left missing a lot of information. My study found that if you looked at 7th grade GPA as your predictor, you would reduce the error by 44%. That's more than twice as much as the SHSAT would do. That's a huge improvement. So if you have better predictors, particularly given the sort of outcomes that we have in the admissions, the disproportionate representation by ethnicity, and also the underrepresentation of girls, if you have better predictors, why not use them? It would make sense to do those. And as was mentioned, nationwide selected public high schools, there are 165 of them. New York is the only place that relies solely on one exam for the admissions. So now I'm going to fire you as director of admissions. You're now parents. How many of you have daughters? Okay, about half of you maybe have daughters. Now imagine that your next door neighbor has a son who got a 559 on the SHSAT. He was admitted to Stuyvesant High School, the most competitive, and you might predict that his freshman grade point average will be 87. So that's very nice for your next door neighbor. But you have a daughter who got maybe say a 550 on the exam. She gets rejected, although she's actually probably going to do as well as that boy because the SHSAT actually underpredicts how girls will do in high school. And in that sense, the test is biased. I'm not saying that they have questions about hockey, but that the test actually underpredicts how students will do. And the same, by the way, is true for colleges, that the SAT underpredicts how women will do in college, and also is not as good a predictor as high school grades are for how they will do in college. So it really makes sense to look at the bias on the exam, which the METIS study did not do. In 2013, the cohort that I looked at, girls were 51% of the applicants and 44% of the admitted students. And yet they ended up doing better than the boys in high school. So as the sole admissions criterion, it's clear that the SHSAT is unfair to girls. I'm now going to turn to some questions that I've been asked by parents and also by alumni. Our grades, our middle school grades, a fair measure. When students are coming from schools where they have different standards, they have different teachers, they take different courses. All of those sound like very plausible questions, and the SAT and the SHSAT were designed to be a uniform, objective metric. But in fact, it's ironic that those exams do not predict nearly as well as achievement at the previous level. So when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense that as Assemblyman Barron mentioned, the SHSAT is a 3-hour sample of a student's activity, a student's ability. It only looks at a couple of areas. It looks at facility in math and in English language arts, and not really very much knowledge. 7th grade GPA is a full year sample of that student's ability across the full range of academic domains, science, history, foreign language, and even in English and math, it tests more knowledge than just the simple facility that is on there tested by the exam. And perhaps most importantly, one thing that it does tap, which the exam cannot tap, is motivation, which is a huge portion of why students succeed at the next level. So it's not surprising that success at one level is a better predictor of success at the next level than any 3-hour sample of a student that is only multiple choice. And in the grades, they're assessed in a wide variety of ways. They may have multiple choice exams, they may have essays, they may have labs, and it's not surprising that that is a better predictor. So let me just remove here for a second. The other question I get asked is how will Stuyvesant and other schools maintain their reputation when admissions criteria will admit students who would not qualify? The fact is that if the exam is not as good a predictor as middle school grades, it stands to reason that the better predictor is not going to dilute the quality of the school. In fact, it may actually one final thing I would like to mention is the Discovery Program, which is a big component of the mayor's proposal. And I can't really speak directly to his proposal about it because at the point that I was studying, there was a very small sample of students in the Discovery Program. But at Brooklyn Tech, there were 35 students that I was able to compare. Those 35 students were admitted with cutoff scores up to 20 points, with test scores up to 20 points below the cutoff, which meant that they had scores perhaps 200 points lower than some of the regularly admitted students. The GPA for the regularly admitted students was 86.7. The GPA for the Discovery Program students was 86.6. It's essentially identical. So there's every reason to believe that, at least within that range, that students may succeed if given the opportunity. And then this gets in part of what Fred was talking about, the error margin. The test has an error a measurement error of 20 points, which means that students on many hundreds, thousands get in with scores within the margin of error, and many students are rejected within the margin of error. And based on one sample, you can't really determine that there's really a big difference between those students. So my take-home message here, and again, I'm not here to advocate for a specific proposal, the mayor's or any other proposal, because there are many things, many possible proposals that my research can point to. But the one thing I do believe strongly is in multiple measures that a single test should never be used for this purpose, and that multiple measures are superior, and that I do feel, based on my research, at least one of those measures ought to be middle school grades. So my take-home message to you, and I will quit, is that with changes to the SHSAT and consideration of additional criteria, it may be possible to select a group of students who will be more representative of the community the school system serves and of the pool of students who apply, without sacrificing the excellence for which New York's specialized high schools are so justifiably famous. Thank you.